with you, our friend Roger.
Sam, are you wanting to wait a bit, or do you want me to go?
No, let me just quickly welcome everybody and introduce you, Roger, and then you can introduce yourself shortly and we start. Greetings, colleagues. I know the previous session, we pushed it to the end because there were quite a lot of questions. So some people are probably just freshening up with some cup of coffee, but we are looking forward to this session that is going to be presented by Roger. It's titled Transforming Enterprises Through Boards and Directorship Development. Roger is my teacher, is my lecturer, is my facilitator, and a friend of a couple of years. We got to know each other in 2018 when I started the Applied Directorship Program, which I've had to put on suspense, and then I'm back with Roger now and a exciting team of participants from across the continent. He's going to be sharing with us what Sirdar Group does in empowering directors, boards, family-owned businesses, private-owned businesses, even bigger boards. Roger, if you don't mind just sharing with the colleagues, but also let me mention that we are in partnership as well in advancing this process. So Roger will tell you more about what it is all about. Maybe just a way of introduction, Roger, to the colleagues, and then you can take it from there. You have an hour. At the end of the hour, maybe 15 minutes, leave it out for questions and answers.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam, and thanks for the invitation. I'm presenting to you from Pretoria, where we are having a little bit of a break from our really hot week we've had. So, what would be great for me to get just an idea of who's on the call. And I'm happy if you also put your cameras on. I see we're using meetings, so it'll be great to see a few faces as well. But if you could just also drop into the chat box where you are, and maybe just a little bit of insight into your business, what you do. And as we go, please use the chat box to ask any questions, make any comments. I will also be asking you some questions as we go. As Sam said, I do a lot of online facilitation, and a large part of how I do it is I ask questions as we go, and then if you do want to connect, please do it through the chat box, and then we'll also, if you can also manage your own muting and unmuting, so keep yourself unmuted so that you can we can certainly allow you to speak as you have questions, but please use the raise your hand facility for that as we go, and I'll be able to call on you there. Sam, if you wouldn't mind making me a co-host, because then I'd also be able to see a little bit more on the participants list.
Where do I do that on the bottom here, Roger? I got your name. Okay, sorry, let me just...
You go to my name and you say more, to make co-host. Great, sorry, okay. That's fantastic, because that also just gives me a little bit more functionality my end as I go. And thanks Sam for the invitation. It's always a privilege to speak to a group of entrepreneurs. Always exciting to speak to a group of entrepreneurs about the things that they do and the challenges that they face. Let me tell you a little bit about Sirdar. Sirdar is involved, we call it in the boardroom. Now, many times what entrepreneurs are caught up in is when am I acting as a director, and when am I acting as an operations person, and when am I actually doing the work, and what am I getting paid for, all of these different things. And I'm going to try to make sense of that. But in another sense, I'm talking to you from the perspective of the boardroom. We provide what we call an integrated boardroom solution. We help boards to find directors, we help to place directors on boards, and that's obviously a good conversation to be having, and that could come out of it. We also help structure boards, so put boards in place, but also put board process in place. And it often sounds daunting, but actually we're all doing that in some way from day one, and I want to show you today how that works. And then as Sam said, my primary role within Siddhar is I facilitate a year-long program called the Directorship program, where we unpack a lot of the comments, and you're going to get some insights, and some of the concepts that we cover on the Applied Directorship program will be, we'll be touching on them, and I'm happy to explore questions and conversations as we go. Recognizing that second comment there, that every board, every company has its own unique journey. And I think that's one of the big challenges, and one of the things that entrepreneurs often stand back and they say, oh, when do we take this board? When do we have to think about this thing called governance? Because that's a word I'm going to be using quite a lot today. Isn't it just putting a whole lot of things, cutting and pasting policies, processes into our business? Well, we can learn from what other people do, but we should never be cutting and pasting what other people do into our businesses, because every one of your businesses is unique. Every one of you is on a journey that is unique. And yet we can learn from one another. The outcome of the governance journey, I suppose, is what we summarize in this phrase, is that certainly good directors grow companies. But I think exciting to know, I've worked very closely with Karen, who you've just listened to around, and one of the tools we use significantly is about saying, how do we ensure that it's not just the good directors on their own, but the great directors who as a team don't only grow companies and create companies, but also change lives. And that's one of the major themes. And I also happen to be good friends and a colleague of the person who follows me this afternoon, Mark Baker, and he's going to give you some real insights, and he's going to get, if I get into your head, he's probably going to get into your heart. So Sam, you've put together a great program, of addressing different areas. And please consider that when you think of a day like today, don't think of them as separate subjects. They're all integrated into how you run and how you grow your business and how you develop what you do. But let me throw a question out there, because this word governance is often one where we get intimidated by. The challenge is it's often it sits in the background, and there are three significant roles that are governance related roles that we don't actually need any training for. Any ideas on what those could be? And great to see you from Sesh from Joburg, Devesh from Pretoria, Rita, good to see where you're joining from, all over the place, which is exciting.
We must make a special exception and welcome Janae from New Jersey in the US. It's very early at the moment. What time is it, Janae?
Goodness.
It's 5:07 a.m. Greetings, everybody.
Okay. Greetings. Great to have you. Absolutely wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
I mean, I experienced the same thing. We also work in New Zealand. So I this next week actually have it's a 9 to 1 session, but a 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. session that I'm running with the New Zealand group. So that's in today's world, we can reach into different parts of the world. So thank you for getting up fresh and early. And if you've been already online, goodness, that has been really early. But anyone got any ideas about these three critical roles that are actually governance roles that often we get thrust on us or we enter into, and yet they require no training whatsoever? Any thoughts? Parenting? Absolutely. Parenting is one of those big challenging roles. My children in their 20s, but I remember, you go to the prenatal classes and you figure out how to get this baby delivered safely, and then you go home and you wonder, well, what's next? And it's a governance role. Why is it a governance role? Because it's about creating structures, systems, processes. We don't think of that as parents often, but every family has its way of doing things, and it is governed. The danger is, and I think when that governance role often of the dad or the mom is missing, it puts a lot of pressure on the other party, and it can be a challenge. And we see the danger of, unfortunately, I mean, it is something we know about in South Africa, unfortunately, that the lack of good governance in families has led to a lot of challenges. What other roles? So parenting is one of them. In South Africa, we've been through something recently where some of the people who we look at may not have actually been trained to do what they do. Any thoughts? Politics. politicians don't fundamentally need to actually be trained. And we know, and unfortunately, I mean, there are good politicians and there are bad politicians, and unfortunately, it's often the bad ones which get in the news. But you know, politics is I mean, we talk about government. Government is called that because it's a governing role. And then the third one, which actually in most legal jurisdictions, the primary requirement is you need to be what's called a capable person, and this capability kicks in at a certain age, 18. I know it's different across some areas, but I mean, that's essentially from the age of 18, anyone can actually become a director. And so in one sense, that's great because everybody has the opportunity to get into this game of business. The barrier to entry is very low, which is fantastic. And I think that's one of the wonderful things. Anybody can become an entrepreneur, and often we have to get into that space. But it's a role which requires skills and competencies that many of us have to pick up along the way. And sometimes we see companies stumbling because the people who are sitting around the boardroom table have never actually trained in terms of what it means to be a director. And in the same way that you saw up front that I had, you know, that mountaineer on the mountain, you know, critical to understand that no one climbs the mountain unprepared. Because if you climb the mountain unprepared, you probably won't come down from the mountain. And I know that's a tough way to put it in on a midday on a Saturday, on a sunny day in South Africa, and we have this snowy mountain. But how often do we get into business unprepared, and then a few years later it's difficult and challenging? So what I want to do, as Sam has said, for the next day, it's 40-45 minutes, and then spend a bit of time taking questions. And I'm happy to take questions as we go, if either in the chat box, or raise your hand as we go, and we'll also take some of those questions. But let's start with some key foundations and some key questions that people who have embarked on this business journey, on this entrepreneurship journey, need to take. One of the first questions, comments, or decisions you need to take as a person starting a business is whether you are going to build or grow or develop. So there's metaphors for all of those things. Part of business is about constructing things. Part of business is about nurturing things. So important to understand that there are different metaphors, but one of the most important decisions that if we don't take, we could end up in what I like to call the entrepreneurial trap. And what the entrepreneurial trap looks like is, it's the person who has left corporate, who's decided that they are going to abandon big business. Why? Because it doesn't fulfill all their needs and they can do it better. And there's a whole lot of reasons for doing it. But one of the main things people say is, I want to start a business so that I can be free. And yet 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, they don't have the time that they hope they would have. They are tied into the technology because they are terrified to let this device or even their laptop get anywhere more than 20 centimeters away from them. You can't go on a holiday. And I see, George, you're enjoying your holiday on the beach there, with your background. Great to see you there. But I mean, maybe the problem is with entrepreneurs is when we're in the trap, that's the closest we get to the holiday. The false,
That's true.
Trap. And it's a trap because as we progress, as we develop, as we grow our businesses, we don't realize that if we don't intentionally think about the system I'm going to call the enterprise, we end up building a business around ourselves, with ourselves at the center. And this is one of those, I like to call them T-junction decisions. In life, sometimes there are what we would call crossroads decisions where we can at a point in time choose this or choose that, and then we come to another one, we can choose this or choose that. This is one of those decisions that are T-junction decisions. We end up going in one direction or the other. The craft, now please also don't take this as criticism. I think there are some incredible people who have built great businesses with themselves at the center, and some skill sets they move in that direction naturally. A lot of professionals, a lot of people find it very difficult to build beyond themselves. But a craft essentially builds with the person at the center, and everything is filtered around them. You'll see I'm a trainer. I do a lot of this, but I'm not the greatest artist. So please excuse my art and my writing. Whereas what the enterprise does is it moves the business away from the person and puts it into some kind of system that can stand alone without the person. Now, it doesn't mean that person isn't involved in the business, but it's about dependencies. You see, the craft-based business is dependent on the individual on an ongoing basis. And then what we can often do inadvertently is we keep all the permissions to ourselves. And so we employ 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 people, but we still remain the center of the system that'll stand alone and distribute that authority, distribute that decision-making. And that's what governance is actually about. Governance is about distributing the decision-making and holding people accountable for making decisions so that the system can run by itself in a sense. And so let's look at some of the characteristics of this. Is that being a craftsman is often about your own knowledge. It starts because someone is very knowledgeable. And as I said, some people do incredibly well in this space. I worked with my mom for a number of years. She was one of the experts in South Africa on reading and children's books. And we came to a bit of a clash because she built a book distribution business. So buying and selling books essentially so she could put herself in front of kids that she loved around us. She probably spoke to, over the 20, 25 years of that business, maybe 1 million school children throughout South Africa, various generations of school children. But she was very much a craftswoman in terms of it was her skills. And so I working with her got a bit frustrating. I wanted to build the business and she wanted to tell kids about reading. And that happens. And it was her knowledge, and it was, wonderful knowledge, utilizing the knowledge in your craft, sharing your knowledge with your team, but not sharing to the point of imparting, but still often remaining the core center. People often then, instead of building a business, they create and own a job. And how often does that happen? And I remember at one stage, my wife challenged me. I've been entrepreneurial for many years, and she said to me, Roger, are you building a business or are you building a job? Because we can do very well for ourselves as craftspeople. And again, please don't take it as a judgment. Some of you may say, actually, that's me. And that's absolutely fine. But that takes a certain amount of governance. We talk more to the enterprise, where the first principle of an enterprise is that an enterprise must be able to operate without the immediate involvement of the founder in the day-to-day running of the business. Now, it's obviously a journey. And that's why I said the thing about these decisions is that we need to anticipate them and prepare for the decision. So if I'm driving a car, I prepare for the T-junction before I hit the T-junction, because if I haven't prepared for it, I'll tend to go in one direction or the other just by gut feel. We need to think about what lies ahead. And that's really, really important. Wherever you are on the journey, you need to be asking yourself, well, where do I want to be in the future? Do I want to be craft or do I want to be enterprise? Now, what is interesting about the word entrepreneurship and the word enterprise, one of the reasons they sound the same to some degree is because they actually come from the same, what we call root word. So that's called etymology. It's the source of words, and it's what do words mean, and I'll throw a couple of them at you today. But the root word of entrepreneur and enterprise is actually a French word, and I'm not French, but it sounds something like entreprendre or entreprendre. I don't know how to speak the French, but anyway, so it's that word, and that word means to undertake or to promise. And so think about it this: if you're an entrepreneur, we often think of an entrepreneur as a risk taker, but an entrepreneur is a promise maker. but you either are the person around which the fulfillment of the promise revolves, a craftsperson, or you build a system that can deliver that promise without your direct involvement. And obviously that's a journey that we go on and we have to anticipate. The second principle is an enterprise must have its own significant value and potential, and can continue to grow and develop that value despite the non-involvement, death, or retirement of the founder. You see, the other part of the entrepreneurial trap is that we start businesses, we work really, really hard, we make lots and lots of sacrifices, and then we want to exit and sell our businesses to someone else. And the person looks at it and says, either the value they offer us is far less than we think, or they buy the business with us and we end up working for them for the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Okay. And I can see some nodding heads. That's a danger. So the best way to sell a business. So again, your purpose is your purpose, but the best way I like to think about it is you want to sell the business like you sell a car. You want to hand over the keys and walk away from it with a value. Now there's normally an overlap. I mean, that's the reality, but how many of us aren't in a position where our businesses could actually operate without us? And that's a challenge. And so when we think about an enterprise, the key principles is that ultimately it's about the team. It's the team and the system. All right. The game rules of the enterprise are different to the game rules of craft, because craft, the game rules tend to focus on the individual and bring everything through the founder or through the craftsperson, whereas the enterprise is a system that stands alone, that, as I said, distributes decision-making amongst the team. An enterprise is separate and distinct from you. And that's really important when you are thinking about governing a company, governing an enterprise. It then requires the separation of different roles in a business, and I'm going to touch on that in a few slides time. But that's really, so that's foundation stone number one. There are some key decisions that entrepreneurs need to make, and the primary one you need to make early in the journey is: are you a craft or are you an enterprise? Is your vision craft-based? And as I said, it's not a judgment, okay, because there are some people whose fulfillment is through the craft that they perform. And so if you have questions about that, then you're welcome to kind of drop them onto the chat box. I'm going to carry on and say, well, how do we then start thinking more systematically about this thing called governance that is required more systematically or systemically if we're thinking about growing a business? And so again, I'm going to throw some questions at you, but we think, so this role of directorship, the reality is a director is required from day one of a company. People often think, well, I start the business as the owner of the business. But actually, you're also probably the coffee maker in the business, as well as the CEO in the business, as well as the person who does the invoicing, as well as, I mean, everything. You're everything. But actually, a business cannot be registered without a director. Okay, you can actually register in some places a business without a shareholder, because you can have non-profit companies that don't have shareholders. You can have different forms but you cannot create this thing called a company, whatever type it is, without at least one, and sometimes at least 3 directors, depending on the nature of the entity. Now, that's pretty standard across the world. Why? Because a business stands alone. It's separate from the people involved in the business, and that's important. So, what do you think? What are some ideas? And again, you're welcome to either put your hand up and I'll get you to shout out, or to just drop into the chat box. So, in your mind, what is the role of a director or the board? What is this thing called governance that they're involved in?
Well, in my mind, I think it is to provide
to provide direction. So absolutely. So I mean, there's a clue in the word. Okay, it's someone pointing somewhere, and I'll pick up on that because Cecil, that's a very important thing. I mean, how often do we sit around the boards and we all point in our own directions? Okay, instead of actually saying, is there a direction that we pointed? Absolutely. So that's about direction. Any other thoughts? oversight. Sesh, thanks for that. So there's a sense in which it's not just about where are we going, but it's making sure we are moving towards it. So overseeing, and that creates, in a sense, the separation, that there's this other role in the business that often does the work. And your challenge could be that you sit in both those roles, that you're the one doing the work and you're the one overseeing the work, because you're the director and you're the operations person, and we'll touch on that as well. Ethically oversee the operations of the company. Great. I think that's one of the key themes that is emerging a lot. Ethics. You see, governance has shifted a little bit from being about systems and processes to being about leadership and people. And it is because we need ethics, and we can rattle off the list of crazy missteps that companies have made and are currently making around ethics and values. To grow the business, set up the strategic direction of the business. How can business change the lives of the employees? In other words, thanks, Franz. That's a really powerful thought there, that it's about considering the impact of the business, and governors consider the impact of what they do. In the same way, remember we said parents, politicians, they're not there for themselves, actually. They're there for some other people or other parties. No, they don't always behave as such. And how often do directors not always behave as such? So this word governance is a powerful one, because it also comes from another word and another concept. It actually comes from the Greek. And if you know anything about English, and I know, I mean, many of you, I speak English primarily and understand, one and a little bit other languages. I know many of you probably, have a whole host of languages, but English is a crazy language because it comes from a whole lot of different places. That's why it's so difficult. And I appreciate that I learned English as my first language, because it comes from Greek and Latin and French, as I said. So the word underlying governance is actually a Greek word. It's the word Kubernetes, okay? And a lot of the original language has got pictures in it. And the picture gives us a view of what the role is about. And the word Kubernetes means to steer or pilot a ship. It was then used in the Latin, that's what the L is there, to direct, to rule, and to guide. So you can see that the original picture is captaining of a ship. The result is that the captain of the ship needs to certainly know where it's going. And ships are firstly built for a purpose. This is a ship called a clipper, and it was the ships that were designed when tea was discovered in India, and these were the ships that went from England to India to fetch tea and bring it back, and they were designed for speed. Probably because the British really, really loved their tea and wanted to make sure they could get a refill as soon as possible. But I mean, they were designed for speed because it was, remember, cost. The longer your ship is at sea, the more cost there is. So a lot of different things. I mean, so it's built for the right purpose. And so if I think about this concept of governance and the role of governors, let's think about what the implications are. Is that the first thing, in a sense, that a director, a board of directors needs to understand is, why are we on the journey? The concept of purpose, absolutely critical. Why are we doing what you're doing? And I'm sure your businesses do a range of different things, but if you don't have a good, clear answer for why, and remember that making money is technically illegal because only the mint is allowed to make money in any country, okay? And money's a result. Money's the fruit on the tree. Here we're talking about the type of tree you're growing, and I'm jumping between metaphors, but we designed the ship, going back to the captain of the ship, to deliver its purpose. And so the ship sits here in the present, but it's pointless if the ship doesn't move. And so, whereas one is the why, the second thing that the captain of the ship has to be absolutely clear about is, where do we want to be in the future? What does our destination look like? Because then we can provide direction and we can provide cohesion coherent direction. We can provide compelling direction. We can also move from where we are as opposed to try to move from where someone else is. So again, one of the challenges in business is there are lots and lots of books about business. We can learn them. I mean, Sam, so many more of those books behind you I've read. Yeah, I've also got the bookshelf thing. Okay, but it's, you know, and there are lots of books and we can learn a lot, but we must always remember that our businesses are often very unlike those businesses. You know, we go to the bookshelves and we buy a book about growth and we read about Google and that at the moment are highly controversial, with starting with an F or now an M or whatever it is, and Google has changed also to Alphabet. I mean, ducking and diving to do some things anyway. But our businesses, we can learn from them, but they're not like those businesses. They're our businesses. Our ship is here, and we're the ones who need to thirdly understand what we have available to us. Because the next step for each of our businesses is the next step for each of our businesses. We can't take someone else's next step, all right? And our next step needs to move us. And so that's really critical for a director, is we've got to understand the why. We've then got to think from the future. And so that word that was used, oversight, is a powerful one, but only if we recognize that it must follow foresight. If directors don't know where they are headed, then how do we know what to oversee in the present? Because the changes we make to our business must move us towards something. And so oversight is important. And we do look back, hindsight, we look at our reports, but that perspective. And so what this word governance does is it says to us that it's not firstly about the systems and structures. Governance is about our desired destination. It's about our purpose and destination. And then our business model must follow that and enable and facilitate that. And as I mentioned, that's, you know, a ship built for speed, for the purpose. And maybe our business is similar. Maybe we need to build for speed. Maybe we need to build for stability. Maybe we need to build for, I don't know, alternatives. Maybe we're building for innovation. Maybe we're not. Maybe our business is one that is simply going to do something better than someone else that we are competing against. And it's not always, you know, doesn't always have to be the latest thinking. I mean, right now, I sometimes get quite frustrated with this word disruption. Every business has to be disruptive. Disruption is dangerous because it leaves a lot of damage behind. And I know that we can grow and create value through disruption, but we need to know that for ourselves, and that is important. Yeah, good question. I mean, about strategic intelligence, which means if I go back to this, what should we be thinking about? It means we've got to make decisions about the future. We've got to think about the future. And that's where strategic intelligence leads us, is we've got to understand, well, what trends are we following? What are we developing? And that's one of the key themes. And I'll pick up on that in a few minutes' time as we close. But I want to then say, based on this picture of the ship, the challenge in organizations or in businesses, there are different roles on the ship. You know, there are different roles that have different interests in the ship, and then there are different stages of growth. And I want to lay those out to you at a high level, and then, you know, ask if there are questions or comments. And the three roles that there are in businesses are roles that we call the three hats. And the important thing is that every business is a legal entity. It stands alone as a legal person. And because of that, it's important that we properly understand the roles that the three different hats have related to this legal person of the company. And the way I like to draw it is as follows, and I'm going to ask you to guess which of the roles you think I'm drawing. That's one of the roles. All right. This is the next role. There's a dotted line, and then that's the third role. And remember, we said that the company stands alone. So the company is over here as a separate legal person. And each one of these roles has a different relationship with the legal person. But what are those three roles? What do you think I'm talking about there? Remember we said, and it's the clue is in one of the comments around the enterprise, that an enterprise requires clear understanding of these three roles to operate, because if we don't understand these roles and relationships, we can not build the right thing for sustainability and long-term value at the end of the day. Sam, do you want to chip in with at least one of them, and then it may give them a hint? This is the test, because Sam's been on module 1. So one is it management, workers, and customers. Thanks. And I think it's Janaea, if I understand, if that's the name. So Sam, keep quiet there. I'll pick up on just now. But one of them is management, absolutely. But management workers, I would put the same in the same kind of context. I'd put them down here. So management or operations. This is the organogram. Everybody in management or in a functional role in the business sits there. Customers, I would argue, are below that line in a sense. They are outside the company. So what are the internal roles?
Let me give the one that's shareholders.
So which one is shareholders and why, Sam?
The top one.
So shareholders sit at the top here?
Yeah.
And the reason I've drawn them separately is because shareholders can legitimately have different views. They have different levels of ability, in a sense, in a company, because they generally, the decisions that shareholders can exercise are often allocated proportionately. So based on your shareholding will give you certain rights and responsibilities. Anyone got the middle one?
There are some inputs there.
The board.
The chat box.
Yeah, I saw in the... So those are all individual directors. Key thing about this picture as well is that directorship is a team sport. And then this is the challenge, is often we are a sole director, but we don't use the phrase board of director because it just sounds strange. A board is a collective. And so the law conceptualizes leadership as a team sport and not an individual role. And that's important, but in a little bit of side. So what is the relationship that each one of these have with the company? Now, before I carry on, it's also important to recognize that you probably wear all three of these hats. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no, it's not, it's not against the law. It's not, I mean, a person can be a shareholder, a director, and a manager or operations of the business. But it is important to recognize that each of these relationships you have with your company are different. Shareholder role is called legitimately selfish. It's about what's in it for a financial role. And it's about, I've started this thing going, so it should return, it should provide me with a return. The return I can only yield as either a dividend or the growth in the value of the business. And so somewhere along the good conversation as shareholders, and especially if there's a couple of you as shareholders, really important that you get on the same page as shareholders. You think about that. What are we expecting this business to do? Are we expecting it to grow and just keep growing? Or do we want it to get to a point where it can start paying a dividend based on what's left behind? As I said, both of the benefits are what's after the business has been running and operating. Shareholders do not have an operational role in the business. The thing they can do, though, is they can appoint directors. Right? And that's the primary, one of the primary roles and responsibilities of shareholders is to appoint a director. But a director has a different relationship between the company or with the company than a shareholder has. And the appointment process does not create a relationship between the shareholder and the director. So what do I mean by that? Well, the legal relationship that directors have with companies, and this is an international, norm that is emerging, is that directors are legally obliged to act in the best interests of the company. That relationship in law is called a fiduciary duty. Right? And all that means, it's, as I said, another fancy Latin word, comes from the concept of good faith, and that's the word fides in Latin. Actually, the picture in a fiduciary duty is the picture of a father caring for their children, and especially their minor children, because remember, a company cannot do anything by itself. It's a legal person. It's actually incompetent, can't do anything. Okay. It only has its competency in the people who are related to it. And so the law says, and it's the law that gives that authority to directors to act. And then you have operations, and operations is what I call a mutually beneficial relationship, because that's employment. People are employed, they transact their skill sets and their work for a package and a salary, or whatever that package is. And so if you're all three of those, it means you actually have three different relationships with this company. And sometimes you can think of yourselves, and the best thing to do is to put that into the right place, and the right place to do that is called the AGM. Okay. At times you have to think about, and probably, and the space for that is called your job.
Roger, are you there, or is it only me that is
Hello,
missing?
I think lost.
He's frozen.
Yeah, we've lost him. We've lost him.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Okay, let's see.
I also lost him here.
Yeah, no,
Oh yeah,
he will
I guess he'll
reconnect.
come back in.
Probably his internet is broken, the link. Let me check with him.
Okay. George, do you have a public company or do you have a private company?
It's a private company.
Okay.
It's a private company, but same thing. Shareholders is us.
Yeah.
Directors is us.
Yeah, this is good.
Us.
It's very illustrative. This is very good visually. Oh, you're on mute, Roger.
Thank you for that. I've always got to hear that every now and again. I'll say that so often to people. But yeah, apologies for that. As I was saying, we have this thing called load shedding, which every now and again, it didn't cut my power, but I think it cuts power between where I am and where you are. But fortunately, I could get it. It sounded like you were having a fascinating conversation about some of these things. So I was going to ask, are there any, questions or comments that come out? Because this is really, really important. It's a very important foundation of business. And I think you can see why it's such an important thing to get right if we want our businesses to go far. Because this is where the conflict comes in. This is where the challenges come in. So any questions or comments around that?
I think there's some comments in the chat box, Roger.
Okay. Yeah, let me just pull up that. Sorry, I had to reload. There we go. So yeah, Mkululi, hopefully I got that right. Good question. So certainly different, the nuances around this would be subtle, but fundamentally there are these three roles in almost any kind of business. I'd argue state-owned company, the shareholder is government, there's a board, and there's operations, okay? There are interesting dynamics there. A private company, we've spelt out. A non-profit company, someone else or another group of people is a proxy for shareholders, often a membership base or a base of beneficiaries. So again, it's important to think about who plays that role, but the three hats are really, really important. And they are applicable across the board. And I've spoken into all kind of contexts with this as a model. And what it does, so the key point of governance based on this is we need to separate the conversations so that we have the right conversations in the right place. Because if in the boardroom we don't separate our shareholder thinking from the board, it suddenly becomes, instead of about the best interests of the company, about what's in it for my back pocket. So maybe we need to invest significantly in the next 2 or 3 years. But I'm sitting as a shareholder thinking, but I was hoping that we'd have a dividend this year. In the best interest of the company is to invest that money into the growth of the business. Best interest as a shareholder is to put it in my own back pocket. If I'm the major shareholder, I'm going to be challenged. And I need to be challenging myself there, but this is why it's helpful to have a structured board, which would typically consist of not just people who are involved in the business as operations or shareholders, but independent of that. Non-executives, independent directors who are not there to wag their finger at the shareholders or the management, but they're there to say, we are together. They're there to remind us that we need to act in the best interest of the company. And that's really important. That's what goes back to purpose. They're the ones who say, look, does this help us fulfill our purpose? And then putting in place the right systems and structures. Joseph, your question about appropriate strategy, I think really important is to understand why. Why do we do what we do? Purpose precedes strategy. And once we figure out what that strategy looks like into the future, we can assess what we have available to us in the present, and we can design policy. So then policy is the third element. So it goes purpose, strategy, policy. Policy needs to be designed to deliver the strategy. So it helps us identify what are the constraints we're working with. So budgets, people, our systems. So that's what policy does. Policy sets the constraints, and then operations operates within those constraints to move forward, to go back into the ship. If I'm in the engine room, I know how fast I can push the ship or how it's designed to do. I'm held accountable for that. If I'm the caterer on the ship, I know what kind of constraints we have available to feed people and keep everybody motivated. I mean, those are the different metaphors that are powerful. So that's how I would apply it to these different contexts. The challenges, and let me just show you one other concept, and then we'll look at kind of wrapping up and really looking if there are any other questions. And please keep the questions coming on the chat. So I think I've addressed most of them there. Is that so? The reality is when we start a business, so if those are shareholders, that's the board, and that's management. It's the same people or person doing all three. Okay, whether it's a couple of you or yourself or just a few of you doing it, that's fairly easy to govern because we are communicating every day, all day about everything. We may be having shareholder and director and management conversations all in one, but it seems to work because we need to just focus on getting this thing on the road and moving. What tends to happen as phase 2 is the shareholder and the director role tends to continue to be overlapped, but our businesses tend to grow, what I call grow down. We add more people to the equation. We employ more people. And that's where the complexity starts to come in, is that there is this level of complexity and various, research shows that somewhere between 7 and 35 people, depending on the nature of the business, depending on what you do, the relational complexity of the business increases. It changes from being, we can talk to one another all the time and keep in touch. Normally what happens somewhere in that space, a middle management emerges. So it's not, there's a distinction between, there's a need to pass authority to someone else or through someone else for something to happen. Also remember that every single person you add to the business adds the equivalent number of relationships to the people you already have in the business. So what that looks like is if you have 23 people in the business and you plus one person, but that one person now has 23 new relationships. So the level of relational complexity becomes really, really tricky. And so that's why we need to think systematically about how do we delegate that decision-making down? Because not every decision can remain up here, because otherwise we are building a craft. We need to give away the decisions. That middle management layer needs to be able to do what they need to do. We need to define it for them and authorize them to do it. But it's not enough just to pass it down. We also then need to hold them accountable, which is the flow back up of reports. So normally businesses that go through this transition battle with reporting, accountability, getting people to act, people feeling they can act without asking for permission. It's quite a significant, and governance helps us do that. Delegation of authority becomes important. Job descriptions become important. Okay. Flexibility becomes important because as we grow, teams need to structure and restructure and structure and restructure. And that's why governance can never be seen as a once and done thing. It must be seen as continuous work in progress. The third stage tends to be that shareholding starts to diverge from the board, and you start getting other people on the board, and so the three kind of separate. So often you have additional shareholders coming in. You continue to grow down as a business, so the business continues to grow down, grows up a bit in terms of that external shareholder comes in, and that changes things in a business. And then often this independent role emerges at the board. Now, those are very simplistic and quite kind of rough. They could overlap and there could be iterations of everything, but it's quite important. The most important thing about being a governor, remember, is to anticipate the future. The captain of the ship anticipates the destination. And so if you're in phase 1, you need to already start thinking about phase 2. If you're in phase 2, you need to already start thinking of phase 3. And that's how governors think. They anticipate what's next. Take a family business. Family businesses transition generationally. The hardest thing in a family business is to build structures and systems and governance thinking that is designed for generation 4 when you're already in generation 4. Or generation 2 because you've already got the challenges and the rivalry and all of those kind of things. You need to anticipate what's next. And that's really, really important from a governance point of view. A couple of the questions. Yeah, the biggest challenge with the 3 acts, the comment says from you as well about the hands-on and operational, because often we don't separate this line between governing and managing. And that's a whole part of the program we run. The ADP, we Applied Directorship program, one of the biggest debates we have is around this line here. Because if boards don't structure proper board processes for themselves, they often get into operational discussions. One of the other challenges in public sector is the appointment process, because often the shareholder can appoint not just the board, but also the CEO. Whereas good governance says that the board should be appointing and performance managing the CEO. And you can imagine, if the shareholder has appointed the CEO as well, what does that do to the board? Essentially, it says the board is irrelevant. So there are lots of dynamics around this. And these are all kinds of things that we love to explore. But I'm running out of time. And what I wanted to do is just give you some thoughts.
Roger, yeah. Because we are going to have a 1-hour break before Mark comes, we can give you 15 more minutes if colleagues don't mind.
Okay, as Sam knows, I'll just keep going. But yeah, I also am a little bit constrained myself. I'm just looking at some of the questions, Charmaine. Thank you for that. I'm just looking. Yeah, so Charmaine, I think hopefully I've given you some thoughts in terms of what to anticipate. One of the thresholds is a people threshold, that level of complexity. There's another, it's interesting, there's another level of complexity jumps or is crossed around the 80 to 100 mark. And that's just a number of people complexity. If we've thought well about that first one is really difficult because it's relational, whereas it's just more difficult. And then it seems to stretch out. So then it jumps to a couple of hundred people later, and then in the high hundreds, and then into the thousands. So it's interesting that it stretches out. We almost have quicker hurdles to jump. And then as our businesses grow, we're not hitting those hurdles so quickly. The cycles in the business tend to slow down. Sometimes we get frustrated with that as entrepreneurs because we want the thing to be highly dynamic. No. A healthy business tends to slow down. It doesn't have to slow right down, but it does take longer to do things, and that's not always a bad thing. It's a healthy thing as long as we can keep the tension. As long as there's a balance of tension as opposed to it just being we'll be just getting tired. A lot of us are tired at this time of year anyway. The other thing alongside the stages is there's a lot of research that businesses go through specific phases, and alongside this, I've spoken about the separation of the 3 hats phases, but alongside this, in terms of developing, there's a creativity phase where we get the thing going. There's a direction phase where we start moving forward and aligning. Then, and this is normally where the number of people increase, we have to have a delegation phase where we have to give away functions and responsibilities and authority to people. A program I did a few years ago, and it was again a 6 or 8 month program. And one of the questions that came up, and we started doing it every single month, and it was a monthly program, is I would hold each of the people on the program accountable for what one thing they'd given away in the previous month. And so that almost became a competition. We need to give away something from our role, because the problem is, if we want to do everything, our roles become so complex and difficult as our businesses grow. We've got to give away the functions, but that takes trust, and it takes good, strong policy and good delegation of authority, good reports. Once we've obviously given away the stuff, we need to coordinate it, and then we need to make sure that it stays together. What it looks like on a bit of a graph is, and this is where the circle is really where governance becomes a critical feature of growing an enterprise. So you can see along the bottom, it's the growth through creativity, direction, delegation, etc. Above the line, there are certain crises. The first one is the crisis of leadership, is that often entrepreneurs, they have a great idea, maybe they're technical, but they don't want to lead, okay? I know lots of engineers build wonderful gadgets or widgets that they wonder why nobody wants to come and actually buy from them, because they'll change the world, but they don't actually want to lead into the future and lead that. Often marketing is a difficult thing there. Anyway, crisis of autonomy. So we've got to, as we give away, you can see autonomy and control is difficult. One of the main reasons entrepreneurs don't like the word governance is because if it's done badly, it can lead to some challenges, and it is effectively, and I would argue that control is never a good word to use in a business. Business is not about control. Power is also not a good word to use in business. The right words are authority and responsibility. If I want to do everything, in other words, be responsible for absolutely everything, my business is going to outgrow me. The nature of business is they outgrow individuals, unless the individual keeps them constrained, okay? As soon as we see it about delegating to other people as giving away my control, we won't give away authority. We'll tell people to do the job, but we won't give them the authority to do the job. I remember explaining this to a gentleman. He ran a business, 250 to 350 million rand business. And he said, now I understand. I said, what do you mean? He said, I bring people into the room. I tell them how wonderful they are, tell them what their job is, tell them why they're the best person to do it. But as they leave the room, I just say, when you want to just make a decision, just check with me before you do anything. And he said, I literally put these people on a wonderful carpet of celebration, and then I rip the carpet out from under their feet, because I say everything's got to come through me. And it is. And so it's authority. Authority can be given away, because then we can hold people accountable for that. Nkululi, I see your hand.
Yeah, it is up, Roger. I just want to ask again, man, what is that red circle again? I think I missed that.
The red circle is really where governance becomes critical. If we don't start putting in place proper governance structures, we start thinking about forming a board properly, putting in place good policy frameworks, those kind of things. And unfortunately, we don't have time today to go into a lot of the detail around that. That's what we unpack significantly over the process of the Applied Directorship program. And that's one of the reasons it's a 12-month program, because it's systematically works through a number of different themes, which I'm going to put onto the slide straight after this. The danger, so this is authority, which is a better word. All right. Once we get that right, it's coordination. The danger is we've got to keep our policy system relevant. There's a really important phrase in governing a business that says we need to apply the principles of governance to our own context, the own stage of the business we're in, and develop it. And it's got to be flexible to change as the business grows. We've also got to explain why we do it so that we can be held accountable if anybody asks, but also so we can hold ourselves accountable. Because every structure and system is designed for now and hopefully the next step. But in 2 or 3 steps' time, that structure will need to be changed, and that will need to be, developed going forward. And if we get stuck into the red tape, we'll get stuck into bureaucracy. And that's why many entrepreneurs leave big business, because they see the red tape. Because how many big businesses get stuck into that, and they simply carry on because of momentum. They're not very efficient, but they just have a lot of momentum at the end of the day. So what does it mean? And just lastly, what does it mean when we talk about the role of the director on a board doing the right thing? What is it actually for? Well, and this undergirds most of the training we do, most of the work we do is what we call unlocking boardroom performances. Ultimately, boards need to perform because it's in the company's best interests. And so boardroom performance must lead to company performance. Companies that are effective, they achieve their goal, they're accountable. And this is the acting in the best interest of the company issue, is that because companies, as they grow, impact more people and more parties than just the founders of the business, those people who run the business need to be held accountable. And we see this in the likes of Boeing, the likes of VW, the likes of these companies where things have gone wrong, and some people have to be held accountable. And that's important to remember. You're authorized by the law, but held accountable by the law. And then ultimately they're sustainable. They survive and thrive. How do directors get there? They need to properly understand why, what their role is as a director. And we've unpacked a little bit about that today. What is their position as a director related to the company? What are their relationships they have with the other directors in the boardroom, as well as with management, as well as the shareholders? So how do we think about those different relationships? The pivot is the boardroom, and the boardroom is the team of people. So now I've got a triangle there, but it's actually the board. All right, the team of people that needs to be constructed appropriately to deliver the best interests of the company, because that's what it's for. The board exists for the best interests of the company, and the director is a person who plays the right role on that board. They contribute their skills, they contribute their perspectives, and based on what Karen said a bit earlier, they also contribute their personality, thinking profiles, and we use that as a tool to help us construct the team right. And then they also do the right thing, and that's what we call an applied boardroom methodology, which I'll show you briefly on the next slide. Mkhululi?
Sorry, no, I know that you don't have time, but you're saying the board is there for the best interest of the company.
Yeah.
Does the company in that statement also includes the shareholders then?
So the shareholders are absolutely a stakeholder in the business, and directors have to take into account all of the legitimate material interests and expectations of stakeholders. I mean, that's a bit of a mouthful, but that's the technicalities. The thinking, and this is really important, is at some point in time, the directors were seen to be acting on behalf of shareholders alone. That's changed and morphed and developed in corporate thinking to saying that directors have to look after the company. Obviously, a healthy company produces a return for shareholders, but it's not the only thing they have to think about, because they have employees, there are suppliers, there are customers, there are creditors, all of these kind of things. An example like Boeing, and again, without taking too much time, Boeing is an example where cost drivers led to certain decisions that ultimately, if you think about it bluntly, ended up killing customers. And a whole lot of them. I mean, not just one or two. I mean, that's the challenge. And there's a current case in South Africa where there's food poisoning, 3 children died. I'm not sure what the outcome is. They ate noodles or something like that. I mean, that's the challenge, is that some of our products can kill people. And we don't want them to, obviously. I mean, I'm being a bit blunt there, but we've got to be very realistic about it. And so we've got to understand that it's not in the best interest of the company for us to be doing that. But if all we're doing is listening to shareholders and we cut costs to the minimum, we cut our quality to the minimum because we are wanting to provide the maximum shareholder return, that's where things get dangerous. So Mkhululi, that's one of the big conversations in the governance space at the moment. Lastly, and then I'll ask for any questions, is that applied boardroom methodology. What does that look like? We use a methodology called the Sirdar Enterprise Governance Compass, and essentially it identifies 4, then 8 themes that boards need to think about and systematize and embed in their board process over an annual or every second year, every 12 to 24 months, really engage around these areas. The compass itself is built on 2 key dimensions. The north-south is where are we going and what do we leave behind? Where are we going? It is premised on why do we exist? So purpose. Strategy is, well, what do we want to be, or where do we want to be in the future? Destination. Direction is where are we standing now and how do we move from where we are to there? And so there's that conversation, and boards need to be aligned around that, because all your decisions around a boardroom table should be aimed at achieving a purpose, reaching a destination, and using what you have most effectively to get there. But we're also accountable for the net result. And you can see, going back to Mkhululi, to your question, one of those key things is shareholder returns, but they're a fruit on the tree. They're not the tree themselves. Okay. And that's an important thing to think about. But it's also broader, the sustainability of the company and its impact broader than that. So how are we accountable in terms of our environmental impact, our corporate social impact, all of those different areas that are becoming really, really important as part of that conversation. And then the East-West is this ongoing tension between, is governance just ticking the box? Okay, which is often what conformance is about. So there's standards we need, there are financial standards, there are compliance issues we need to address, and that's really, really important. We've got to play by the rules, because otherwise we don't have a good business, right? But we've got to play, and that's the performance element. Okay, so we've got to play by the rules, and that's important to think about. Sport's a good metaphor there, is that a sport team doesn't win if they break the rules. And that, I think, is really, really important to think about. That is, let's understand what the rule set is. Some of the rules are imposed on us from the outside looking in, legislation, regulation, but some of the rule set we put in place for ourselves. We put in place for ourselves the delegation rule set in our businesses, what we require from a reporting standards, what we require from an objectives, and that all needs to be linked to the game we are playing, which is the game of our own business that is unique to us. And then you can see some of the other themes that are critical are organizational culture and evaluation and improvement. So strategy and culture go hand in hand. They're 2 sides of the same coin. Strategy being obviously where we want to be and our purpose, but culture being what do we allow and what do we disallow? What are we known as opposed to just what do we achieve? Because we could achieve great objectives, but we could have a reputation that is shocking. And again, let's not mention any big brands, because there are some big companies with some reputational damage right at the moment around the world today. And then on making sure that it stays on track, that it's improved on an ongoing basis. As I said, it's not once and done. And then between now and where we want to be, there's our impact on stakeholders. What is the net consequence of what we do on those we deal with, be they employees, customers, suppliers, the environment, etc. What else do we face? Risk. So what other things do we accept? What things do we have to try to avoid? And so those are the 2 kind of tracks of stakeholder engagement and risk governance or management that we need to also continually embed in our decision making. So as we're making decisions to pursue our purpose, achieve our strategy, we need to keep, in a sense, these 8 themes, in our minds. And as we think about those, systematize those into our board process, so that in an annual cycle, we know that we've reviewed our strategy, we've relooked at our risk map, we've relooked at our stakeholder map based on any changes to strategy. We've examined our organizational culture by getting indicators from the business about how we are perceived and how we're doing. We've got a good policy that delivers performance ultimately, and we've also made sure that we are signing off all of the areas where we've had to comply, so that we've played by the rules. So that, in a nutshell, is what it's a little bit longer than anticipated, but I trust it's been valuable. And you can get more information from Sam about the kinds of services that we offer. But it's been wonderful to chat to you. And any last questions as well? Joseph, very good question. And I saw that. I kind of sort of ignored it because my friend Mark is talking to you a bit later about IQ. So you can ask him all of the difficult questions about IQ. But absolutely, board members, IQ, I think, is becoming more important than just the I part of it. Okay. Obviously we need skills and competencies, but actually it's the, it's IQ and EQ. He's going to talk about EQ. I got a little bit size there, but it's about EQ is becoming more important than just IQ. We need competent people, but we need people who are also aware and able to also understand the impact they have on others. So yeah, good. If there are any other questions, I mean, you can get hold of us through Sam. Thank you, Sam. Any last questions or comments? And then I'll be saying cheers. And I'm just double checking that I haven't missed anything. Yeah, Sesh, a couple of comments there. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think it's designing. You've spoken about policies and procedures and processes. There's lots of definitions for those kind of things. Really important for the board to understand that it's ultimately the custodian for the whole policy framework of a business. So it needs to understand it, make sure that it's understandable to the people who are working within it. That dotted line between the board and management is critical because policy creates the space that operations operate within. So yeah, good. Over to you, Sam. Any other questions? I'm happy to, yeah, good.
Thank you very much, Roger. You can take off your sharing and so we can see everybody. I think the session wasn't just educative, it was very informative and also motivating because a number of people here are entrepreneurs, and you have highlighted the fact that it's important to understand the separation between ourselves and our businesses, and we need to always look forward to separate those various areas of governance structure. So yes, we will be talking to Mark later on, and it was through Roger that I met Mark, and today Mark's organization, Micro, is also now part of our network of partners, and I think there's synergies there. Roger, you didn't talk about that in our directorship program, we do involve contribution compass. So the previous session with Karen was on contribution compass to determine the natural energies of the directors before they come onto the board. So you are right, the whole day is it's a build up, and everyone will receive the link to all the other sessions so that they can watch the videos and connect to their own particular session. So yeah, we're gonna take a break, 1 hour break, and then we will be joined by Mark Baker from the Micro, and he's gonna be talking about emotional intelligence as a critical resource for entrepreneurs, managers, and leaders. And him and I, we agreed that the people that are gonna be part of that session, they will be given a 1 month full access to the platform to see how powerful that platform is. And I can't spend the day without doing the 10 minutes reflection on my own emotional intelligence journey. So yeah, let's take a break, enjoy the lunch, and those who are not going to be joining us later, you're definitely going to miss, but we wish you can change your mind and be part of that, because that is for me the highlight of the day. We'll see you at top of the hour, 1400 hours. And Mark is a very amazing person, not that other people were not amazing, but he makes you understand emotional intelligence than reading the books on emotional intelligence. We'll see you at 2 o'clock. Janae, have a cup of coffee. I hope you are not feeling the pressure of having to wake up very early in the morning, but we look forward to see you later.
Looking forward to it. Goodbye.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
In a while.
Bye, thank you.